the newsagents.
Senator Sanders, welcome to the newsagents. Thank you so much for being with us. We're going to come on to your book in just a second, but I just thought it's the anniversary of the invasion by Russia of Ukraine. Is the US and the West are they there for the long haul?
I think so, and I hope so. What Putin did was unacceptable in terms of international law, and the disruption of the entire effort to bring the globe together, to deal with climate change, to deal with pandemics. It was a terrible act. And I think we've got to stand firm and tell him that he cannot get away with that.
So given that it was such a flagrant abuse of international law, are you surprised that in South Africa, in India, other countries, the global south, there is no support for this? They just think this is some European war that they're not part of.
Well, I think that's disappointing. But I think, on the other hand, what we have seen, much of Europe and NATO stand with the United States in telling Putin that this type of behavior is not going to be accepted, period.
Senator, you've written this book. It's okay to be angry about capitalism. Now, in that book, you rather throw down the gauntlet to people like us, to journalists, because you say you never get asked particular questions.
That's right.
So we thought we would
ask you one of the questions.
Let's go.
Let's go. You see, we're making you happy already.
And I'm going to have to rewrite the book.
Well, exactly. We're having an influence already. You say, what does it mean morally, economically and politically that 3 multi-billionaires own more than the 160 million Americans who make up the bottom half of our society? So what does it mean morally, economically and politically?
Well, morally, it to me is an outrage and unacceptable that so few have so much at exactly the same time as so many have so little. And in America, we have a declining middle class. We have over 60 million people, over 60% of our population living paycheck to paycheck. We have 500,000 people are homeless. So what the book talks about is not that people should not be able to make money. You want to go out and start a business, you're successful, make money. But do you really need tens of billions of dollars? How are you going to spend that? So what the book says is that from a moral perspective, that's unacceptable. And I don't think we want a culture which says to the young kids in this world, you know what, your ambition in life is to make tens and tens of billions of dollars. And from an economic point of view, it is also quite wrong. We have so many needs in the United States and around the world, and I think it's just unfair that so few have so much. Now I've been asked the question.
There you go.
I can't. I have to have an asterisk.
Exactly.
You could say, except for the newsagents.
There you go. All right.
Podcast.
All right.
Obviously, we see that concentration of power in all sorts of fields, and increasingly modern fields as well, so like technology, for example. We've seen what's happened with Elon Musk taking over Twitter, which is incredibly powerful. Right. I mean, what do you make of the way he's done that and what he's doing? Do you think it's a problem?
Sure, it's a problem. It's a problem that Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post, that Elon Musk owns Twitter, that other billionaires own much of the media in the United States. Do I think that's a problem? I think it's a massive problem. Because at the end of the day, billionaires have an agenda. They want to become even richer. And they don't go around telling their reporters what to say or do. They don't do that. But essentially, they want to protect their own interest. And therefore, the nature of the corporate media in the United States is to avoid talking about the wealth and the power of the people, the billionaire class, who, among other things, own the media. So is it a problem? Yes, it's a serious problem.
So should Twitter be broken up?
I think in the United States, to be honest with you, we have been very, very lax in terms of what we call antitrust efforts. So you're seeing in sector after sector, including media, fewer and fewer people owning what we see, hear, and read. And I think we've got to be a lot more aggressive. So in the United States right now, you got 8 media conglomerates that control what 90% of the American people see, hear, and read. Is that a problem? I think it is. So I do think we have to be much more aggressive in breaking up monopolistic enterprises in every sphere.
And just, you said in the book that there should be no billionaires.
Yes.
No one should be a billionaire.
Yes.
if they pay their taxes and they are successful, what's wrong with that?
Well, if you had a tax structure that was fair, they would not be billionaires. Look, here's what's wrong with it. What's wrong with it is if you work hard, you're into money, you make a successful business, should you be rich? Fine. But really, I think
there should be a cap. Where do you put the cap?
Well, I just said, for a start, they should not be billionaires. So the cap
you
would
could
be,
have 500 million or 200 million?
I'm not writing tax reform here, but I do think that it's insane and absurd that you got people with hundreds of billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars. I think that is, the system cannot afford them. We can't afford them. We got 500,000 people in America who are homeless. We got 85 million people who can't afford health insurance. And that so few control so much of the wealth is, to me, economically and morally wrong. And I don't think we have to spend our lives worrying about the well-being.
But then it's capitalism that's not working. Then you're saying, I don't believe in capitalism.
No,
if
I'm
you
saying,
believe in making money...
No, I didn't say that. You want to make money, make money. But
But
really,
you're gonna
should
put-
3 people own more wealth than the bottom half of American society? Do you think that's appropriate? Then you may say, well, what's the line? All right, my line is they should not be billionaires. You're worth a few $100 million.
But I'm trying to ask you, what is the line?
Well, I'm just saying, you want to make, if there should not be billionaires, then less than that. I think you can probably get by if, you're a successful businessman, you made a few $100 million. Think you can get by? Think you can house your family, feed your family? I think you probably can. But this culture that says it's okay, that I can do anything I want, I could step on anybody, I could destroy the environment, so that I can have tens of billions of dollars, really? I don't think it's a good idea.
Senator, in the book you say that it's true. Most people often, historically, have tended to become more conservative as they've got older, and that you've gone the other way. Why do you think that is? Why have you become more left-wing as you got older?
Because I am a member of the United States Senate. I've traveled to every state in this country. I have talked to many, many thousands of working people, and I have interfaced with the pain that people are experiencing. So I talk to people who have lost loved ones because they can't afford prescription drugs. I have talked to people who have suffered because they don't have any health insurance in the United States. I've talked to people who are trying to raise families on $10 or $12 an hour. I've talked to kids who cannot afford to go to college because it's just too expensive, and others that are postponing families because they have to pay off student debt. So when you are active in public life, as I am, and you see the reality of what goes on in America, you say, what? This is unacceptable. And the more I see, the more unacceptable.
But why do you think so many people go the other way then? They become more right-wing. When you've seen what you've done, other people in politics tend to become more right-wing as they spend more time in public life, but you've gone the other way.
Because, I can only, speak about the United States, although I think it's not much different elsewhere. There's what we call a bubble. You know what a bubble is? You get surrounded. So you're a lobbyist for the fossil fuel industry, and you take me out to lunch and you tell me about all of your problems, and you're a lobbyist for the pharmaceutical industry and you tell me about all of your problems, and there's a billionaire over there who really needs a tax break and somebody needs deregulation over there. That is the culture you are surrounded with. You forget to go out onto the streets and talk to working people who are working longer hours for low wages. So you got surrounded with a culture that says, okay, well, you really need that tax break for a billionaire? Okay, we're going to give it to you. And that's why I think people have become more conservative.
I've heard you make this argument over the years and a number of times, and look, the same argument resonates in the United Kingdom as well. And after you spoke last night, there was a senior Labour politician who went on the radio, a guy called Wes Streeting. I'm sure you don't know. He's the he could be the next health secretary if the Labour Party win the next general election. This is what he had to say.
We're not a party of protest. We're a party that wants to be in government, so we can make a difference for working people.
He's talking about taking on the big vested interests and the vast inequalities in society.
That's what Labour governments do. And with respect to Bernie Sanders, I genuinely think if he'd won the Democratic nomination, he wouldn't have beat Donald Trump at the election. America would be under Trumpism.
Well, let me inform that gentleman, who I do not know, that every poll that was done during that period had me defeating Trump, and I believe I would have defeated Trump, as a matter of fact.
Were you surprised? I was at the 2016 convention in Pennsylvania.
Philadelphia, yeah.
Yeah. And I spoke to a number of your supporters there who said, there's no way I'm voting for Hillary Clinton, I'm going to Trump. That your supporters were switching.
Well, I don't know how many at that convention would have done that, but
there were a number around the country who did. And there were people
some
at the
around
convention
the country
who were
did.
totally unreconciled to the idea of Hillary Clinton being the Democratic Party candidate?
Well, I doubt at that convention there were very many, because those are more sophisticated political people. But there are, look, here's the bottom line. In America, there are tens of millions of people who are hurting. They can't afford health care, they can't afford education, they can't afford prescription drugs. Their kids, in many ways, are looking forward to even a lower standard of living than they have. And they look and they see the very rich getting richer, and they're angry. And they got angry at the Democratic Party for not standing up to them. And Donald Trump comes along and says, I know that you're angry, but the people you should be angry at are immigrants and gays and people of color and this, that. That's who you should be angry at. And unfortunately, some people respond to that. But what we are trying to do is build a multicultural, multiracial movement that brings people together with anger, but taking out their anger against a corrupt system, a unfair system, and the people who control that system.
It's interesting, Senator, though, isn't it? Because what the gentleman that you never heard of, Mr. Streeting, was basically...
I don't mean to be insulting. I just...
No, it's fair enough.
I'm not surprised you haven't heard about the Shadow Health Secretary in the UK, to be honest. But what he was basically saying is it is indicative of the different way that progressive politics in the UK and US has moved, isn't it? Because in the US, the left and the progressive movement that you embody has been brought inside the tent by President Biden. And yet in this country, the Labour Party, led by Keir Starmer, has increasingly moved in a direction where the left has been expelled or ostracised, or certainly their power has been minimised. Do you think for a progressive party in the 21st century that's a mistake?
What Labour is doing?
Yeah, and not embracing that sort of progressive left agenda.
Again, I'm not an expert on UK politics, and I don't want to get involved in it. But this is what I can tell you. Joe Biden was smart enough, and I've known Joe Biden for many, many years. He was smart enough at the end of the campaign to say, hey, Bernie Sanders won a number of states. He won the overwhelming support of young people. He has a lot of support among working class people. I want to get elected president. I'm going to work with him. Now, that to me is a pretty common sense attitude and idea for a politician, right? I want to get elected. I'm going to work with you. I'm going to appeal to your supporters. What do I have to do? And after the election, Biden did something very unusual, you may recall. What he did is said, Bernie, let's bring our people together, your campaign, my campaign, and let's look at the major issues facing the country, the economy, healthcare, climate, and so forth. And let's see how we can work together. So our people, we had task forces, and our people sat down for hours and hours and hours with Biden's people. We hammered out a proposal. And I think that was very smart of Biden. It was the right thing to do from a policy perspective and from a political perspective. So our people said, well, he's listening to us. They got involved in the campaign and were a very important part of his victory.
Embracing the progressive left, has it been important to him? And other progressive parties shouldn't ignore that?
To me, that's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, I don't know how you ignore all over the country, and I expect in the UK, you have a lot of young people who are tired of incrementalism. They want to bring about transformational change. They're deeply concerned about climate. Everything being equal, they're going to have a standard of living lower than their parents. And they are demanding of government to respond to those crises. Of course, you invite them in. You have to listen to what they want, and you got to move.
Well, I totally understand what you're saying about you need to bring these people in and you need to gain their support. Labour went into a general election in the UK, and I know you don't want to be drawn too much on, but with the most left-wing policy agenda in decades in 2019, and went down to their worst defeat since 1935. Now, isn't the lesson from that this is all very well for campaigning? It doesn't mean get you to governing.
Again, there are a lot of factors over everything, and I'm honestly not an expert in UK politics. All I can tell you with absolute certainty is, people say, I'm an extremist, really far left. Really? Is healthcare as a human right for all people far left? Demanding that the rich start paying their fair share of taxes, far left? Making sure that all of our people, working people, earn wages that are livable, making sure that when you retire, you can retire with dignity. Does that sound extremist to you? I'll tell you what's extremist. Extremist is giving tax breaks to billionaires. Extremism is ignoring the crisis of climate change, which will impact the entire planet and our kids in a very big way. So the ideas that I fight for in poll after poll turn out to be quite popular ideas. And that is why people like Biden are smart enough to say, all right, let's work with Bernie and others.
Well, indeed, when you were on Face the Nation a few days ago, you said of President Biden, I think he is a much more progressive president than he was as a United States Senator.
True.
What's changed?
I think he's learned. I think he's been out in the world. He's campaigned for president. He has seen the kind of needs that are out there. And I can tell you, I have spoken to him, and he said it publicly, that he wants to be the most progressive president in the United States since FDR. And by the way, what we passed a bill called the American Rescue Plan early on. That was the most significant piece of legislation passed in modern American history. Went a long way in helping us deal with the pandemic and the economic crisis that the pandemic brought us. And with Biden's strong support, we worked on a bill we called Build Back Better. And that bill was transformational. That bill would have done more for the working class of the United States of America than any piece of legislation, maybe ever, certainly since the 1930s. We came within 2 votes of passing it, and Biden was strongly behind it. So I think what he was saying is, yuck, I want to see this government start standing up for working people, and I support that.
Okay. We're not going to get into the 2 votes that you lost of Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, right. But we're going to come back because this is such a fascinating conversation. We'll be back with Senator Bernie Sanders after the break. And we're back with Senator Bernie Sanders. You were just talking there before the break about Joe Biden and the changes he's made. Do you want him to run in 24?
Well, that's his decision. I think he probably will. And if he does, I will support him.
And if he doesn't, will you be in?
No, it's much too early for me to be talking about that.
It is interesting, I think, from this side of the pond, Senator, how, I mean this with absolutely no disrespect whatsoever, but that American politics has...
Don't you always get suspicious when interviewers say, with all due respect.
I mean it sincerely, John, as you know, I always do. But, from this side of the pond, American politics can look quite old. It has been dominated by increasingly people in their 70s and their 80s. And in
Good
a way,
thing young people like me are active, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Quite right. And indeed, you have a lot of very young followers. But in a way, to take it back to some of the themes in your book, I wonder kind of how satisfied you are about that, because you could look at it in a sense that that's a bad sign for the health of American democracy. You need to be powerful, you need to be rich, you need to be older, all of these sorts of things. What is there ever an age that's too old to be president or a senior political figure?
I really believe this sincerely, and maybe a little bit of a conflict of interest here, but I think you judge people in their totality. Is age a factor? Sure it is. Is intelligence a factor? I think it is. Is experience a factor? Is honesty a factor? There are, a dozen different factors that people have to consider. But to simply say, somebody is over 70 or 75, that person is disqualified to be president, that's ageism. That's all it is. It's like saying, you're black, or you're brown, or you're Asian. You can't run for office in the United States. You don't disqualify people because of that. But I would also say that while it may appear that some of the political leaders in the United States are older, what you should know, and I don't know that everybody does, we have, as a progressive movement, been very, very successful in the last 5 or 6 years in electing more young, very young, progressives to the United States House of Representatives, and often young people of color. But the House, in terms of progressivism, is stronger today than it has ever been, and certainly in years to come, some of those young people will become national leaders.
Do you think Joe Biden's fit enough to run in 24?
Fit enough is the word? Yes, he's fit enough.
And all this talk about when people say he's not quite there, he's a bit
That's right-wing.
Look,
we all have our things, right? And he's known for his what we call gaffes. He's famous for that. But, that's right-wing stuff that he's, mentally this, mentally that. That's crap. You can argue with him whether you like his ideas. That's what you should be arguing with about. But don't make those kind of ugly personal attacks.
Do you respect him?
I like him. Yeah, I do. He's a very, I've known him for years, and I think those people who know him understand him to be a very decent human being, a very compassionate person. Again, you can argue about, I am much more progressive than he is. We disagree on issues. But do I like him? Yes, I do.
And what about Trump? I'm not asking you whether you like him.
I do not like him.
No, I know.
There's a newsagent's exclusive.
I kind of guessed the answer to that one. Do you think that there's a very high probability or reasonable probability that the 24 US presidential election will be between 78-year-old Donald Trump and 82-year-old Joe Biden?
I wouldn't bet the farm on it. I think if Biden chooses to run, he will be the Democratic nominee. I'm not so sure that Trump will be. He may be, but don't think that is.
But like you, he's got a great connection with blue-collar America, don't you think that? I mean, him going to East Palestine in Ohio, where there was that, the train derailment and the
look, no question that a lot of especially white working-class folks voted for Donald Trump. That's true. And one of the things that, as somebody who comes from a working-class family, that bothers me a whole lot. And I think the fault of that is with the Democratic Party. And where I disagree with that gentleman from the Labour Party is I think we have to be aggressive in reaching out to that working class and make it clear that we understand they're falling further and further behind. We are prepared to take on powerful special interests and stand with them. We can neutralize Trump if we do that.
And talking about the Labour Party, I mean, I remember at the time where you were running high in the 2016 presidential primaries, again in 2020. Jeremy Corbyn here was leader of the Labour Party. It felt like there was a real growing movement on the left. I mean, when Jeremy Corbyn lost, you must have been saddened. What was your reaction at the time?
I mean, again, I don't want to suggest to you that, I spend my whole life following what goes on in the politics.
If you want to, you can listen to our podcast.
Okay. I have a hard enough time following what goes on in the United States.
Fair enough.
But look, I think Corbyn deserves an enormous amount of credit. I think in the UK and in the United States, a lot of people have given up on politics. I can tell you that in the United States, historically, young people do not vote in large numbers. But you know what we have seen in the last number of years? We've seen that change. So not great numbers, but a lot more young people. And I think Corbyn deserves credit for energizing whole bunches of young people, working class people.
So the Labour Party have said, look, you can't run as our candidate at the next general election. I mean, people listening to you will think you are a member of the Democratic Party.
Yes.
You stand as an independent. Would you counsel Jeremy Corbyn to do the same thing?
Well, I'm not going to give Jeremy advice. He will make his own decisions. But, I will say, again, I'm not involved in UK politics, don't particularly know much about it.
I bet you know quite a bit.
Well, it just seems to me to be a little bit strange that you throw a guy who was the former leader of the party out. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
From an American perspective, though, how do you think Britain is perceived now in America? I mean, we've gone through similar sort of experiences. You had Trump. Some people would say that Boris Johnson was a sort of equivalent to Trump. Is that how you sort of saw him?
No, not quite as bad as Trump. Trump was, I understand the similarities, but, Trump is a demagogue. Trump is somebody who is a pathological liar. I mean, it's really quite amazing. I think he has a very hard time telling the truth about anything. He happens not to believe in the rule of law, which our societies are based upon. Does not particularly believe in democracy. And so I don't think that comparison with British politicians is quite correct. But Trump is a very, very dangerous guy, and that's why I work really hard to do everything I could to make sure that he was defeated and Biden won.
And nothing is more important than the well-being and safety of democracy, which we saw on January the 6th in the United States of America, that terrible day. In Britain, we're going down the route of introducing, Conservatives want to introduce new voter ID laws. And I know there are similar moves in America. When you hear people saying...
I think they're learning from America on that.
Well, what do you think?
Look, I think it is... Here's what that's about in the United States. I don't know about UK. What happens is if you are young, if you're a person of color, if you're low income, often you don't vote. And what they are very intentionally trying to do is make it harder for people to vote. So you have some states where you can own a license, you have a license to own a gun, that's legal. That's identification to give you a gun. But you could be a college student at a state university, that identification kind of doesn't work to get you your ID qualified.
So we should be very careful about this.
Of course you should. Look, everybody, there's nobody, I think, who does not believe that voter fraud is a very bad thing. If you vote twice, if you lie, about who you are, you should be punished. That's a serious crime. But on the other hand, you don't want to put up a dozen laws that make it harder, that have the precise goal of making it harder for people to vote. Yeah.
Okay, look, we're running out of time. I've got a final question to you. We've touched on age. 81 years old, Bernie Sanders. How are you so bloody good at TikTok?
Can you give us some tips? Can you give John some tips, please?
We need to learn.
Okay, here's the story. Listen closely.
Okay, I'm listening.
When you
I'm
see
taking
somebody
notes.
jumping up and down in Midtown Manhattan, just walk past and ignore the whole thing. And then within 5 minutes, you're going to be hundreds of thousands of people see you on TikTok. You got it?
Okay,
just ignore it. When somebody's crazy, walk right on by, and you'll be a famous person.
Bernie Sanders, thank you very much.
Senator, thank you.
The Newsagents. This is a Global Player original podcast.